Welcome to Behaviorally Speaking Leadership for Changemakers. I'm your host, Dr. Bubb, and today we're continuing our special 4-part series, Young Leaders of Grenada. In this second installment, Timara Bubb, Brandon Felix, Chrystal Williams, Peter McBurnie, and Dericka Samuel explore the defining decisions that have shaped their journeys, the role of confidence in leadership, and how young leaders navigate uncertainty while staying grounded in their values and purpose. Let's dive in. Well, hello again, my young leaders. We're here again on the battlefield again, here for our second session in the series. Really kudos to all of you for, the responses and the thought you gave into the first episode in the series. It was very well done. Obviously, there's always room for growth, always room for improvement, right? We're always in a continuous improvement process. But needless to say, you've dove into something new, into a new category, a new experience, and you always will take away from every experience the most that you can take away from it, and how you can apply it, and where does that propel you to. So thank you for returning for our second segment in the series. And so today we really want to focus on decisions that shape us, right? And how we become leaders through action. And so in my experiences in my life, so there's so many decisions I've had to make, and so have you. And so we'll talk about that a little bit tonight, right? So let's start off with the first segment, really focusing on decision making and leadership foundation. So to start us off, can you tell us about the defining decision that you've made, and thinking of that decision, talk to us about what values or influences guided your choice. So Timara, how about you? Can you get us started?
For sure. So I've made a lot of decisions, I would say, that was defining for me, but I would say the biggest one was definitely choosing what to study in college, TAMCC.
Yeah.
So I did physics, math, biology, and chemistry. So that was a big decision for me because I did want to pursue all of it, but it wasn't very well encouraged. But I did have friends who chose to do it with me. And then through that, I was able to grow academically and also able to make connections with other professors who pushed me along the right path, with other friends who I'm still friends with, who encouraged me. So I would say that's one defining step that I took early on, where I wasn't really sure that was going to be such a defining step. So like, for example, later decisions that I took, I knew, okay, this is what I want to do. This is the effects it would have. Okay, you got this award. What to do with it? This is the effects it would have. But making that choice to follow what I wanted to do, despite it being difficult or not encouraged, definitely was a defining step that helped push me to where I am today.
Wonderful. Thank you. So I heard friends, I heard family, right? As influences. How about you, Brandon?
One of the most defining decisions I've ever made was deciding that I don't want to make my circumstances define my future. What I mean by that, growing up, I struggled with reading, and I had a speech impediment. There was times when I felt different from everyone else. But while I was in primary school, I made a decision to fully surrender my life to God. And trusted in Him with my future. I remember because of my inability to read, I heard stories about God giving for wisdom and understanding. So I was sobbing as a little boy. Like, I remember I have no idea. And I was like, God, I need wisdom. I need understanding. I need help with my speech. And as time went on, I got opportunities where I had to speak openly. I found myself speaking in front of groups, leading teams, a lot of teams, stepping into spaces that was once intimidating to me, and I remember a time on camp. Right, I was camping with some folks, and I was the leader of that camp, and I mispronounced and misspelled a simple word, a basic word, and everybody started laughing. I was so embarrassed, and but instead of letting that moment break me, I allow it to build me, and the value that guided my choice were faith, perseverance, and purpose. I wanted to become someone who could make something positive and make a positive impact on others. And looking back, that decision had changed the direction of my life and helped me shape into a better leader today.
Yeah, I love how you started that off. Don't let your circumstances define you, right? You are who you are. The things that are happening are not you, right? And so it's a very strong message. And then you talked about you were focused on your purpose and perseverance and your why. And there's this quote that your vision is the greatest asset you'll have. So as long as you have that vision, you know where you're going, right? Whatever circumstances happen will not define you, because you're like, all right, this is just a part of my path, and I'm going to keep going on to where I need to go. Yeah, wonderful. Peter, how about you?
So yes, I would say one of the most defining decisions I've made was choosing where I would pursue my bachelor's. Because it was unprecedented. So I studied in Romania. Yeah. And prior to that, there were a lot of concerns, whether I'll be able to adapt, cost of living, the people, the culture. Yeah. And, it was really daunting. But I was like, you know what? I'm just going to apply, because I sort of have a let's see what happens sort of attitude. So I'm like, what could go wrong? I mean, if anything goes wrong, I just come back home. Like, it's that simple. But even, nevertheless, I was still, concerned to the very end. Even when I initially got there, it was cold. Couldn't speak the language. Few people spoke English. Yeah. And I was kind of second guessing myself, should I, go back? It's not too late. I can always go back home, whatever. And then I just said, let me just stick it out. Let me just stick it out day after day, month after month. And then eventually things change. I, started to like the country and the situation. And, that led to a bunch of other experiences and opportunities, some semesters abroad, even my 2 trips to the U.S., learning a new language, sort of learning a second language, networking. Like, it just led to countless opportunities that I don't think I would have had if I had chose to remain, or let's say go somewhere, a bit where it would have been easier. Yeah. So it just kind of reminds me of that, not always choosing the path of least resistance. And even if something may seem, difficult at the beginning, just stick it out, stick it out. And either it gets worse or it gets better.
Right. There's one way to find out. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Peter. So you talked about the stick-to-itiveness, right? Sticking to it, stick-to-itiveness. Yeah. That's really critical. And so, I would say the same for me, leaving home at 20 to come here was a difficult decision, a defining decision, because you talk about there was no one here, right? That all the family is back home. Money, okay, forget that. That was the top thing, right? To think about, in a different place with no one I knew. And so to your point, there were days when it was a struggle. It was hard. All right, I can't do this. I can't do that. I don't have money for this. I don't have money for that. But then it all just worked out. And honestly, if I had stayed there, that's happening now, don't think it would be happening, right? Because it's what I've been exposed to. So I think you all kind of shared the same message, is kind of sticking to what it is, whatever the decision is. And so Peter said, what can go wrong? And I always say, what do you have to lose, right? What do you have to lose? Try, give it a shot and see what happens. So you stuck, like Brandon said, the perseverance. Timara talked about, what she decided to study, and we see where we are now. So thank you for sharing that. So how do you make tough decisions when the outcome is uncertain or clear? So like Peter talked about, traveling and not knowing what the option was going to be. Dericka, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, how do you make tough decisions when the outcome is uncertain or unclear?
When making decisions, I think about, it's based on what I'm making the decision for. Okay. And for someone who's in the service or in the helping area, when making a decision, I think about the outcome, or the outcome for example, my students, or the outcome for the group of people I'm making the decision for. So I always think about the pros and the cons. So I will measure it that way, you know, and that will help me make the tough decision, because at the end of the day, to me, it's like, what's best for the group of persons or for myself. So I look long term. Yes.
Yeah. So long term instead of short term, and what's best, right? That kind of helps you make those decisions. Thank you. Chrystal, what about you?
For me, it's a bit different. I do look at the outcome, but in this case where I'm not sure what consequences this decision will make, I try to gather as much evidence, research, information as I possibly can about this challenge, whether it be a challenge or whether it be a situation, and I will make that decision based on that. Because sometimes we may think that the decision is tough, but if you ask somebody who's in a different field, they might tell you, oh, I have a solution for that already. Let's talk about it deeper. So sometimes we need to look at a broader picture and be like, are they persons that was in similar situation as us? Can they help us? Or can we go online and see research data, get as much information as we can? Because an informed decision is better than a very last minute and kind of anxious decision.
Yeah. I love that. And especially that you talked about informed decisions. So like often when I am having conversations with my daughter or other people, even in what we do in my field, we always have to make sure we're informing the parents, right? And it's called, informed decision making. And so informed treatment and informed therapy. But I always say to my daughter, be informed. Just like you said, Chrystal, get all the knowledge, get all the information you need about A or B or C or D. And then at least you're making that informed decision. So that was really an excellent point. Tamara, what about you?
Making a tough decision is going to be tough. And as people mentioned before, getting all the information you can. But I think a good choice too is to go to people that you trust. You don't necessarily have to agree with their opinion, but seeking counsel from others who have different experiences than you. They don't necessarily have to be older or smarter, but just different experiences. People that you trust can be very helpful. And I say people you trust, it doesn't have to be your parents. I remember once my dad told me, if you have questions, you need to go to somebody. It doesn't have to be me, but somebody that you trust. Of course, I go to him because he has a lot of experience. He's very wise. I trust his opinion. But I think having that kind of support system or people that you can go to, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to take what they say wholesale, but seeing things from different points of views is very helpful. I always go to my siblings, to my parents, just to find out, okay, this is what I think. Is there something that I'm seeing the wrong way? Is there something else that I can consider? So although they don't make the decision for you, getting those other perspectives might help something that was once unclear or uncertain become more clear or become more definitive, or say, okay, well, if I don't do this, then these would be the repercussions. So I should just go through with it, or I shouldn't go through with it because. So I would say that among other things, having good people that you can talk to, resources that you can depend on, really does help with difficult decision making.
Yeah, 100%. And, I like that you said, that you don't have to make whatever decision they're suggesting or accept their feedback. And it's the one thing I always say to Michaela, my daughter, is hear all my thoughts from all of my experiences. We were having a conversation, I think it was this week, and I was like, okay, so I've shared all the information with you. Now, ruminate on it and you make whatever decision you're going to make. But I've shared my thoughts, right? So I think getting perspectives from others, just being open to listen, and then you be empowered to use that information to make your decision. So we've all had different experiences. And so the way I think of it is I think of it just like what I do every day, special education, writing IEPs, individualized education plan for students. Honestly, it's our best guess. We won't know until we start implementing it and we collect data, right? So just like for us, it's always a hypothesis, like it's our best guess. But as long as we're following through and then collecting the data and, assessing, the outcomes and the progress, and then we could say, do I continue? Do I make a switch? Things like that. But it's really, really important, everything you guys said in terms of decision making. So let's take this conversation a little step further, right? So I want you to finish the sentence. A strong leader chooses to. Brandon, what would you say?
A strong leader chooses to be humble. Now, one of the greatest lessons leadership has taught me is that leadership is not about people serving you. It's about serving people.
Yeah.
Many people see leadership as influence, titles, or authority. But I believe true leadership begins with humility. It means listening before you speak, learning to, to lead, learning about leading actually, and putting the needs of others above your ego. Throughout my leadership journey, I had moments where I had to swallow my pride and accept corrections, and making decisions that benefited the whole team rather than myself, can move mountains, can go a long way. Because one of the things that I've also, realized is that humility is what creates trust. People are more willing to follow a leader who genuinely cares about them. So when I think about, ownership and responsibility in leadership, I believe a strong leader chooses humility. And that is something I embedded in myself. Humility, the higher I go, the lower I climb. Because humility keeps you teachable. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me open to take constructive criticism, and it focuses on serving others.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that, Brandon. You made me think of, when you talked about the humility and serving and caring. So one of the things I do is if I have a student who is in a medical emergency and has to go to the hospital, or staff, I'm dropping everything else and I'm doing it. I'm getting out an ambulance with them, right? Because I will not allow them to go alone until their family member arrives. I stay with them until the family member arrives. I still stay a little longer, and I continually check in. And to me, it's about those kinds of things, showing up when people need you. So, okay, I'm the supervisor, but no, this person is sick, and so I just can't send them off, to the hospital by themselves. So you really made me think of that, in that humility and being of service to others, and showing people that you care without actually saying, oh, I care about you, right? And so to your point, then people are more willing to follow and step in and assist. So whenever I go, everybody steps in, at the center, at the school, because then everybody just kind of wants to follow that whole concept of caring for each other. So thank you, Brandon. Peter, how about you?
So yes, I would end it with a strong leader chooses to lead by example. I know it's probably cliche or it's oversaid, but I think it's true. It rings true that, as a leader, it's not so much about what you say or, what you may try to proclaim or whatnot. It's more about, okay, what do you actually do? And can people see based on your actions that, okay, you are indeed a leader. So, they have this saying, what is it? Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah. So, if you're saying one thing, you're advising, your subordinates or the people in your group that, we should do this, we should do that. But then you're doing something completely different, then what do they pay attention to? Right. So, you need to lead by example. Your actions and your words needs to be in agreement, and that should show the people that are, your followers that, okay, this is what we do, that's what we do, this is what we don't do, because our leader does this. So I would say chooses to lead by example.
Yeah, I love that. If we want someone to do something, we should model it, right? So whether it's leadership position or it's the parent, the teacher, whomever it is, modeling that as well. Thank you, Peter. Dericka, how about you? A strong leader chooses to
step forward when responsibility is needed. I think you mentioned it earlier, is showing up. Is not looking for recognition or gaining title. Is showing up when you need to show up. Without any, without any expectations. Okay. But you see a problem, you see an issue, you see where you need to step in. I believe you just need to step in. Yes.
Yeah. So showing up when needed, and I think to add to that, even when it's uncomfortable, right? So it might not be the most uncomfortable situation, but we know we need to step in, we need to be there. So let's do it. So thank you for that. So let's move into talking about confidence, right? It's something I'm just really big on. Confidence, self-belief, you'll hear me talk about those things all the time, and courage and action, right? I want everybody to just be confident, believe in yourselves. Like, we're all humans, so we're going to have some doubt, but at the end of the day, I got this, I can do this, right? So what does confidence look like in real life, and what are common confidence misconceptions, Chrystal?
So to me, confidence is being your authentic self. You going into any setting where you can be. And as young professionals, we always undervalue ourselves, especially when we're in the midst of persons that are experienced. So when you go to seminars and you're called to speak or you're called to ask questions and you're thinking, oh, I'm not confident enough to ask this question. What if everybody looks at me? No, confidence is, I'm here for a reason. I'm in this room for a reason. If I weren't qualified, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah.
So a lot of misconceptions is that you have to be well put together. You need to know everything. You need to have all the knowledge in the world. And that's not necessarily true, because you can still have confidence and still be learning. So that is what I would say is confidence in real life. Just being your full authentic self.
Yeah. Chrystal, I 100% agree with you on that, especially the authenticity, 100%. But like, knowing that we're learning every day and we don't know everything, right? So I remember when I just got my first job as an adjunct professor, there was a behavior analyst. She was a consultant from a university. So I was like, ooh, Jessica, like, what do I do if a student asks a question and I don't know the answer? Because in my head, I'm like, they're going to expect you to know everything. She's like, just tell them you don't know. You'll get back to them. It's that simple, right? So I remember that conversation for as long as I live. I won't forget it. And it's exactly what I did. And to your point, Chrystal, that shows confidence. The fact that you can say you don't know, but I'll get back to you, is the most important part. Or, you'll follow up with someone else, or you direct them to someone else. That to me is a true marker of confidence. So thank you for sharing that. Timara, what about you?
Okay, so a common misconception about confidence is that you have to be loud, or you have to be what is a stereotypical leader. So everybody looks at you, or you, as I said, you're loud, you command a lot of attention. So I would say that it's believed that confident people have to have that kind of personality or those kinds of traits. But it doesn't necessarily look like that in real life. Being confident can just be being sure of what you do, having faith in what you do, or being, for example, if you're doing your work, whether at your workplace, at school, just being sure, oh yeah, this is what I learned. I'm confident that I'm doing it correctly. So being quietly self-assured is a sign of confidence. Being able to speak to people with respect is a sign of confidence, because you don't have to assert your dominance over them. You are certain that what you're saying has value, it has merit, so you don't have to belittle people or push them down in order to seem bigger. So I would say that is a sign of confidence that a lot of people tend to misconstrue or look down on. So being confident doesn't mean that you have to be loud, or you have to be domineering, or you have to be rude. Being confident, you can also be quiet. You can also be humble. You can also be gentle. You can also be kind. These things are not separate from confidence, but I think it helps someone to know that, okay, this is what confidence can look like. This is somebody that I can trust. This is somebody that I can depend on, because although they know what they're doing, they're still approachable, and I feel confident going to them because they will be gentle with me.
Yeah. I love that. Being self-assured, that belief in yourself. And it could be quiet, right? Whether it's, in your mind, mentally, you're like, yep, I got this, right? That self-talk, again, those self-affirmations. Brandon, I'm curious your response, especially, with your personal experiences that you've shared.
Yeah, and I have to agree with everything that was said so far. It's like the exact words from my mouth. Confidence is not being the loudest in the room. Confidence is having the courage to move forward, even though you're afraid. Many people see confidence as, like, people never doubt. If you're confident, you cannot have self-doubt. And that's, that's not true. Everyone experiences fear and uncertainty, especially me. The difference is that confident people don't allow fear to make the decisions. And for me, what confidence look like? Confidence look like speaking in public, even though you struggle with stuttering. Confidence look like accepting leadership, even before you feel completely ready.
Yeah.
And one of the misconceptions I would say, is that people believe that they have to be confident first. In reality, confidence is continually growing, throughout actions, So the more you step out, the more you learn. The more you learn is the more confident you will be.
Yeah.
And confident is not the absence of fear. It is not. It is choosing to move forward despite it.
Yeah. I love that. It's not the absence of fear. It's choosing to move forward despite it. And I remember years ago, this was at a previous job, I had a university professor. We were doing some research. So anyways, and we were gathering data and we were meeting with, one of my staff. And she was so, not confident. And it's something I worked with her. And so she's in a much better space right now. She's in a different position. But she's Caucasian. So she was just red. Right. And so it was just so telling, that she didn't feel confident. She was just saying that, and she was unsure of herself. So I worked with her, and, she was able to improve. But the one thing I wanted to add is, so there was this TED talk by Amy Cuddy, and she talked about how our posture and our presence can influence how others perceive us, particularly in terms of confidence. So yes. I know I have this one staff, she's always like, Dr. Bubb, you're always so poised and present. And it's and it goes along with what Amy says. It's not a matter of like, I'm the supervisor. It's a matter of just being confident in whatever it is, especially often in meetings where parents disapprove, right, what we recommended. And that could just be a meeting with me. It could be a meeting with state mediators, or it could be due process where lawyers are involved. So again, whether it's a meeting, whether it's a check-in, it's that posture and that presence, because what it does too, it just builds you in the moment, right? And so people perceive you as someone who's confident, but someone who believes in what they're saying, and that they, will trust whatever it is you're saying them. So those are the two things. And I'll share this funny story. So this might have been 3 years ago now. Timara and Peter saw it, but I was the speaker at the graduation ceremony at Convent in Grenville. And so at the end, they had some of the students, give me gifts, and they were so timid, and I'm like, all right, I'm in the moment. This is a graduation. I'm like, all right, let's try this again. Here, this is how you shake, giving the firm handshake. I'm also really big on firm handshakes. So if someone comes up to me and it's not a firm handshake, we're like, all right, let's try this again. But it's those kinds of things, even if you're not confident, being able to just present yourself in such a manner that you are then believing yourself and others are. So it's really critical. And for me, it's important for us those are soft skills that are not often taught, right? And so for me, any opportunity I see to help people develop those skills, I work on that. So let's shift a little bit and let's talk about where you experience self-doubt. So share with us a moment, right, where you experience self-doubt. But like Brandon said, you chose to move forward anyway, and what helped you take action? Peter, how about you?
So yes, the first thing that comes to mind when we speak about self-doubt, well, firstly, I think I experience self-doubt quite often, although it may not seem like it, but I would just ignore it and continue anyway. But the first thing that comes to mind would be, again, my time in Romania. So I had to learn the language. Mm-hmm. So before I began my degree, I had to actually spend some time learning the language and learn it to a certain level in which I can pursue my degree in it. Yeah. So I began, few months went by, was learning here and there, but, we had a final exam in about a month's time. And then when I really looked at where I was, I began to panic a little bit. Because I was like, wait, this exam is in 1 month and I could barely have a conversation. Yeah. So much less study.
Yeah.
So, yes, we are doing them. But the thing is, I guess, it's not the first time learning a language, but it's similar to a bamboo tree in which, you're making progress. So with the bamboo tree, I believe, the roots, they would extend, they would grow, and it seems like the plant isn't growing. And then eventually, it starts shooting up, not all of a sudden, but because you wasn't seeing that progress all along. So I think it was similar. It was a similar situation I had where, yes, I was making progress, but, it wasn't being really manifested like that, or the way I thought it would be. So, so 2 weeks, closer to the exam, I still wasn't really there. But anyway, I passed the exam. I did what I had to do, and I passed it. And it was oral, written, and reading, and I passed everything. And then there was summer holidays and whatnot, and I was due to begin in about September, October. So the entire summer, and even then, I still wasn't too confident. But I said, well, degree's in a few months. I already spent all this time. I'm doing the degree, some way, somehow. And then during the summer, that's when I think I made the most progress. And that's when I was out of school, when I already did the exam and everything. And then I was like, but why is that? And then I really thought, I was like, no, it was all the work that I put in when I thought that, look, I wasn't making any progress. But no, it's more because I'm in this sort of space. I was working as well with natives. So that's where I was really getting, and I got no choice. I had to speak to customers, colleagues in the local language. So that's when it really started coming out. But it wasn't just, in that moment. It was all the studying, all the grammar work we did, all the reading comprehensions that I did prior when I thought, look, I wasn't making any progress. And then I actually started to see the results in the summer. And then, when I started my studies, I had no issues in really understanding. And I successfully graduated. So I guess that speaks for itself. Thanks.
I mean, you again brought up stick-to-itiveness, right? You had some self-doubt, but you hung in there, you stuck to it. But the environment and the exposure, right, also helped. And I think that helped you take action. So then, you went out, you were working, but then you were in environments where you were, in a situation where you had to do it. So I think that also contributed as well. Dericka, what about you?
I often experience self-doubt, but something you said, which I completely relate to, is not the self-doubt, but how you portray yourself. One experience I had was my first time doing public speaking. It was youth parliament. And that was my first time, the first time we went on the parish level. And I was doing my speech and everything. I was really nervous, but I did not portray as that. And with the worst thing that nobody don't want to happen to them is someone stand up on you and the clarity. That is the worst thing you could let happen to you if you are debating. And that actually happened to me. So in my head, I was freaking out. I was looking, I physically feel my heart beating. But I just took a deep breath and I responded and I continue. And everybody in the end was like, oh, you handled this well and whatever. And in my head, I was like, I could have fallen right there and then if you only know. But the thing with me, I good at hiding my self-doubt or fear. So I, keep my posture firm, keep my head high, keep my tone of voice. My voice did not break at all. And, so as you said earlier, is we do experience self-doubt, but it's how you allow persons to perceive that. Nobody did not notice I have self-doubt but me. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And that story made me think of, how we say back home, they talk in stupidness, but they talk this stupidness with so much conviction, you believe it is stupidness, even though it's stupidness, right? So it's the same thing. They know it's nonsense, but they're saying it in such a way that they're so confident, even you're swallowing the nonsense. So it made me think of that. Like, people do that all the time, right? It's so untrue. There's no sense, but just their presentation of it, they believe in it so much, even you're swallowing it up. And you're getting fooled and bamboozled. So,
as the saying goes, it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Exactly. So, yes. Exactly. Yes. So you stood there and you remained confident and no one knew, because even if you weren't sure and you had the self-doubt, your presentation of it, people believed in you. Chrystal, how about you?
So for me, a moment where I experienced self-doubt has definitely been job searching. As a young professional, again, we tend to undervalue ourselves. So a good example would be that there was a contract out that I had applied for. I'm looking at it, I'm like, can I do this?
Yeah.
And officially the persons came and, we were in the interview and I called a figure that I thought that it was over. Like, you know, when you're thinking you want a job and you're like, oh, okay, let me not give them too high of a figure. But surprisingly, they came back and they said, oh, well, that's great because you're definitely within the range. And it's like, oh, okay, it's definitely, you know, so you get that kind of self-doubt whenever you're applying for jobs and, you know, you really want a job, you want that stability, you want that security. However, again, all of the work, all of the late night studying, all of the experience, everything led you up to this moment. So it's like you're wondering, do I measure up to what this organization wants? Can I actually be the professional that organization needs, when in actuality you have everything on paper and you have the experience for it. So now I look based on what anything, whether it be professional, social, anything, I look and be like, these are my experiences. I'm going to be confident no matter what because I'm capable of doing the job. So self-doubt, it comes and it goes, but it's just constantly reassuring yourself to put yourself in the position to, you know, go after what you want.
Yes, 100%, Chrystal, like, especially in the job search market. So, like, those are conversations I have with Michaela, my daughter, but, like, I'll be like, you ask for what it is, you believe your worth, right? And so it's either it's going to be yes or it's going to be no, but ask, right? So you'll only find out if you ask, but then also knowing what that is, so you know where you stand and how you're willing to negotiate and what's that number. You're like, yep, nope, goodbye, you know? But also too, to your point, Chrystal, in interviews, I like do them so often, but when people come to interviews and they're so confident, right, and they're willing to learn, even though the job is new for them, I'm more than willing to hire them, right? Because they have the confidence. They're showing me they have the confidence, but they're also telling me they're willing to learn. And nobody knows everything, including me. But if you're willing to learn and you're teachable, I can work with you, right? I can teach you, I can mentor you. I have no problems doing that. So I think that's an important point. So go in with that confidence, but also, Chrystal, taking the skills that you have and what does this job require, and show how those skills match, and how can, you know what I mean? How can you work your answers around the skills that you have and what they're asking you for, so you walk out of there with the job, right? And so going back to that authenticity you talked about, Chrystal, like just being your true self, right? And making whatever that situation is work for you, but being okay to accept whether it's no or yes, you know, walking in with that mindset, so you're not becoming overwhelmed and then, you know, becoming upset. And that's what I try to tell people. So to keep the conversation moving, we all make mistakes, including me, right? We all have setbacks, including me. My thing with all of this is I always say mistakes are my greatest teacher, because you know what? Most of them were so embarrassing. Honey, you don't have to worry about me ever doing it again. So I learn from it and they stay with you. And then I can also use them to help others. So after a mistake or a setback, Timara, how do you rebuild your confidence, right? And reset your mindset?
Okay, as you said, we've made so many mistakes. Some of them we don't want to share because they're so embarrassing. But yes, rebuilding confidence after a setback is important. I would think, how can I say this? So, for example, my confidence in myself doesn't really change, but maybe surrounding the situation would be affected. So I would not say to myself, oh, you're so horrible, you're worth nothing, you can't do it. But it's more like, I approach a situation wrongly. What can I take from this? So it is more about being embarrassed about the situation rather than devaluing yourself as a whole. Because you're a person, you're not perfect. You do make mistakes, right? So I think treating yourself with respect, with care, talking to yourself like how you would talk to a friend instead of talking to yourself harshly really does help, especially if it's something that you really look forward to or something that you're confident that you're going to get, and all of a sudden you made a big mistake or you don't get what you think you were going to get. So helping to reset your mindset too is essential, because you have to think, okay, what did I learn from this? Would I rather have not done this at all than learn this lesson? And is this something that I can share with others to help them in the future? You don't necessarily have to say exactly what you did wrong, but use it as, I don't know, an anecdote, as a funny story, something like that, to say, okay, I'm relatable. Not everybody succeeds at everything they do, right? So being able to have that lived experience, especially as a leader, would make you more relatable, would help you be able to teach others more lessons and be able to sit with others, talk with them, because I'm sure you would feel that someone who has everything perfect all the time wouldn't be very relatable.
Yeah.
It wouldn't always be fun to learn from them because you're like, okay, I made a mistake. You never make mistakes. Then what are we really doing here, right? So I would say treating it as a learning experience and as a way that you can help to connect with others, and looking at it as a growing period for yourself, not necessarily to come down harsh on yourself, but to say, okay, this kind of shook me up a bit. Let me recenter myself. Remember what is good. Remember that I am capable, but I did make a mistake. What can I learn from this? Apply it to yourself and grow. I think that's the most that we can do in situations like those.
100%, Timara. It's kind of like, in the moment, it's embarrassing, but like just being able to smile about it after, and move on from it. I think it's critical. Brandon, how about you?
I started laughing since before it started the questions, but I totally agree so far. When I was younger, I had a very hard time growing up, especially when it comes to myself. I was hard on myself, especially when it comes to mistakes. I would replay failures in my mind and focus on what went wrong only, not what I could learn. And in secondary school, I attended the St. Angela Again Secondary School, SAS, right?
Go SAS.
And when I was in Form 4, my father pulled me aside when he collected my report card, and he looked at me and he said, "Best you drop out of school and go on construction," just like that. And I break down crying because, when it comes to studying, the focus was not there because I never had this discipline where I can read for hours, whatever. If I read 2 minutes, I want to close my book, So it was really, really hard, But over the time, I realized that mistakes are not proof of failures. They are opportunity for growth. And today, when I experience setbacks, I ask myself, what happened? What can I learn from it? What can I do differently next time? And I remember, because I couldn't turn to because I feel like people won't understand. And truth and in fact, a lot of people like me. And that's why I love to share my story. I love to share my setbacks, and my feet help me a lot. It's what keeps me grounded, and one of the Bible verses that I read, like rehearsed it, is Jeremiah 29:11. It said, remember, that the purpose and the plans, that things that God have for me, God have a bright future for my life. And that's what keeps me going, So that meant one mistakes cannot define me, and when I see those stuff, it gives me hope. I will build my confidence by focusing on the lessons instead of the losses. And by remembering that growth comes with challenges. And that is why today I'm pursuing an accounting degree, and many more. So that's one of the things that I can say about my setbacks.
Yeah. It makes me think of, the term forged in fire. That was in our 50th anniversary song, right? 50th independent song. But like, the more that we go through, it's always building you and preparing you for something. So whatever the mistake is, what are you learning from it? Where can you go from here, and seeing it as an opportunity to grow, right? Peter, what about you?
So yes, in terms of, mistakes and setbacks, just like everyone else, I also have them, probably more than others. But, because I'm always looking for, the next opportunity, the next idea, and they don't always work out. So I try, in terms of rebuilding confidence. I feel like, when you have achieved a bit, although yes, we're just at the beginning, but sometimes, when you achieve a bit, and let's say there's a setback or a failure, sometimes you can look back and you'll be like, but no, I did this, I did that, I did the other, which means that, okay, this current setback is just, it doesn't define me, because I've done so much in the past. That I've already proved to myself that, look, I'm capable of this, that, the other. So I, tend to just look back and be like, actually, this is not bad, because if I look at the last few years, I did this, I did that, So just be extremely logical with it and just look back, at your history. And then in terms of resetting, I think a little bit of helpful delusion plays a part. So, you you remind yourself, I'm him. So, okay, yes, setback here and there, but at the end of the day, I'm him. So, this is temporary, but I will reset. And, you just have that unwavering belief. I mean, it could be fueled by, your faith, your self-confidence, but you just, you'll be down for a while. You accept the situation for what it is. You accept it, you think it over. But then you say, okay, enough. Time to get back. So that's how I deal with setbacks and mistakes.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Peter, to your point, like really focusing on, you've got this, you've done it, you can do it. So this mistake happened, we're going to be sad for a while, but we need to move on. And so, to become a board certified behavior analyst, you have to pass an exam, right? So there are some people that, have tutored, mentored, taught, whatever, and they haven't passed the exam. But there was one in particular, she failed it a number of times. So she would call crying, and I'm like, say her name was Timara. Timara, you have today to cry. Tomorrow, no, I need you to snap out of it. And then, you know what I mean? I need you to get back on it. So it was a setback. It's a huge setback to spend the money, sit for a 4.5-hour test, answer all those questions and not pass, right? And then, the self-doubt, and you feel like, oh, no, everybody, I didn't pass, especially when you tell everybody you were taking the test. I always tell people, don't do that. But it's like, I understand, including me, people need a moment. And Michaela knows, she'll be like, Mom, all right, I know you need today, I'll check, I know by tomorrow you'll be okay. And it's the truth. Like, so, but I always say that to people. I'm like, you have today to cry, to do whatever it is you want to do. Tomorrow, I'm going to need you to get back on track, right? Because if we stay in that state of just self-criticism, we're not getting anywhere. So it's really important that we understand people are humans and they have emotions and they need some time to express them, but just continue to support them to keep moving. So let's talk about, on that note, emotional regulation, very, very important topic, and self-advocacy, even a more important topic. So Dericka, when you receive criticism, I've received criticism, I still do, right? Especially because of my position. How do you manage your emotions and decide how you're going to respond?
One thing I like to do for criticism is listen to the message and not my emotions. But one other thing I like to do is, I like to say to myself, if you're giving me criticism, and I hope it's constructive, like, come with a solution. Don't just, So if you give a criticism and I come with a solution, I will definitely listen. I will take it into consideration. I will learn from what you're saying. But like those criticisms where you're just spreading hate or finding only the negatives and maybe not suggesting something, like I still try to listen to the message, but I'm not quick to take it into consideration, unlike a constructive criticism with solution. So, So I try to separate the message from the emotion. And I honestly do appreciate that, because one thing I like to say to myself, I rather you be straight up with me so I can know where I stand, I know where you stand. Don't care about my feelings. My feelings may hurt, but at least I know what the situation is or what my position is. So, yes.
Thank you, Dericka. Separating the message from the emotion, that's very important. Thank you for sharing that. Chrystal, what about you?
Criticism is good. Sometimes. It often depends on how that criticism is delivered. If you're in a professional setting and your supervisor or someone is coming to you about a product or a deliverable that you would have submitted, and they want you to do better and learn a skill, and they bring across this criticism in a way that you can perfect a skill or a job, then it is good to be open and accountable and to accept it, and so you can do better, you can grow better. However, I agree with Dericka in the sense where criticism is with hate and jealousy and it's not coming to you in a professional and respectful manner, then you have to it's going to be uncomfortable at first, but you need to stand up for yourself. You need to say, whilst I understand you're disappointed in X, Y, Z, I do believe that going forward, this is the best way in which you can address an issue. So again, for me, because there's so many different fields. When criticism comes, it's good to just take a step back and smile. When you smile, it throws them off because they're like, oh, you should be upset, but you're smiling. They might even think that you're a little bit crazy. But when you smile and you're calm and you're like, I understand you're frustrated. However, let's work to ensure that this doesn't happen again or look to resolving it. And it completely knocked them off the ground because most persons tend to expect retaliation and expect a high energy of, oh, she can't do this, or she can't tell me what to do, XYZ, not of the matter. So to me, again, it is how it is delivered, and then you can act according to that, based on that challenge.
Yeah. So when it's delivered with respect, but then also with like some suggestions, right? Then that makes a difference. Timara, what about you?
Yeah, so receiving criticism is difficult. I think for some people it's more difficult than others. So for me especially, it's helpful to take a step back and listen to what they're saying and then self-reflect. So even if they're coming in good faith or in bad faith, I think sometimes you can glean good information from both. So even though someone might be exaggerating or trying to put you down, if you reflect on what they're saying, you can say, even though they're coming in bad faith, even though they're being mean, you can say, oh, there is actually some merit to what they're saying. Maybe I can work on X, Y, and Z. That may not have been their goal. Their goal may have been to put you down or to diminish you, but you can still use those as avenues to grow. So criticism is very helpful because you're able to look outside of yourself. How you perceive yourself, of course, is not how everybody else perceives you. So being able to get that secondary information to help yourself grow is always helpful. Criticism can come at times when you're feeling low, at times when you're feeling confident, but I do think that it is helpful a lot of the time. So being able to not react emotionally, as in being very angry or crying, bawling, always a plus, but then being able to separate your emotions and look at what they're saying critically and say, okay, this makes me feel uncomfortable, but is it true? Because it can make you feel uncomfortable and it can be true. So then you have to do some work on yourself and say, this is not the person that I want to be. How can I fix it? How can I remedy it? Is this something that I have to issue an apology for? Is this a valid criticism? Is this something that I did wrong to hurt someone else? So I think accepting the criticism, if it is true, analyzing the criticism if it is untrue, and then doing work to heal the damage that you did, whether intentionally or unintentionally. So I think those are some steps that I take when I think of how to respond, because sometimes how I speak can come off very brusque. So I say, oh, this is not how I meant to come off. I'm sorry. Apologizing goes a long way. And it helps when you mean it, because it shows that, yes, I did something wrong, but I'm not infallible. I am able to apologize. I'm able to become better, and I do respect you. And helping build that kind of dynamic. Of course, there are people who will always dislike you. There are people who would always say, oh, you can't do anything right, or you do everything wrong. Or if someone dislikes you, it always colors their interactions with you in a negative way. So there's only so much you can do in those situations. But looking inward and saying, yes, this person doesn't like me, but what they said actually does have some merit. This is something I can improve on. I think it's a sign of strength and something that can help build you and help you grow a lot.
Yeah, 100%, Timara. So there's a lot to take away from that. How is it presented, as feedback or as criticism, right? And so feedback could be constructive and beneficial. For me, I always say, and I say the same to Michaela, just if it's like personal, know yourself. Knowing yourself is half the battle. So once someone comes and tells you something, you already know, like, okay, yeah, already, you're right. So it just doesn't affect you as much. Number two, you talked about reflecting. So if it's something we actually need to work on, once we know that and we know that about ourselves and it's actually something we need to improve on, then we're taking the steps to do that. Now, professionally, it's like really listening and validating, right? The concerns, whatever criticism or feedback is shared. But what I always do proactively Timara, and everyone is like, I'll say to staff, all right, I need you to give me feedback. And they look at me like, I can't, you're the supervisor. I'm like, nope, I need you to think of one thing and I need you to give me feedback. It's like giving people the opportunity to practice giving feedback, regardless of who the person is, because we want to hear it. And oftentimes they have important, critical feedback that you need to hear. But if they don't say it to you, I always say, I can't pull what's in your brain from in your brain. So you got to say it, right? But the other last thing I want to share on this, and then, I'll keep the conversation going, is I don't know if you guys ever read the book, Man's Search for Meaning. So this was written by Viktor Frankl, right? He was, he's a psychiatrist, but a Holocaust survivor. And he had this statement. It resonates with me simply because I'm a behavior analyst. So it uses a lot of those words, but it talks about just pausing. Sometimes, guys, just pausing when we hear something really then shapes our response. So he says between stimulus and response. So the stimulus, whatever we hear, the feedback, the criticism, and the response, there is a space. There's always a space, right? And he says in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. So oftentimes just taking a pause, our response is different. We don't always have to be quick to respond, quick to judge. Just listen, take it in, soak it in, give it time. Sometimes when we become angry, upset, that's also very critical. Just pausing. And then, our heads are clear. So I think that really resonates with me because there's always, guys, that space and that power to choose how we respond regardless of what it is. So thank you for sharing. Let's talk about how we stay grounded and how we stay focused and how we stay intentional under pressure. Sometimes it's difficult, but we have to be able to find ways to do that. Brandon, how do you do that?
Right. People often say pressure bursts pipe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a common statement, but there's also a saying that says pressure creates diamonds. So whenever I face pressure, I focus on what I can control. And release whatever I cannot.
Yes.
Let's be honest, because there will be times where certain things are out of your control and people try to control what they cannot when they're under pressure. So my thing is I try to control what I can, and break it into whatever large challenges I have. I break it into small steps and tackle it one step at a time. And again, when I study the Bible, it teaches me that whenever whenever pressure comes, my endurance will grow. And with pressure, it creates endurance and also maturity. So I would say prayer helps me also clear my mind and make me stay focused on solutions rather than problems. Because the more I think, it's like the more problems I realize. And I've learned that pressure doesn't destroy me. In fact, pressure reveals my character, and it develops strength, like I said. So when, my values, my purpose, my goals, is in front of me, pressure is something that grows rather than something that I feel afraid of. That's how I treat it. I love pressure.
Pressure raining down on me here. No, but I loved, that response, Brandon. It's, what really resonated with me is you talked about control and focusing on what you control. It's something I say all the time, Brandon. I actually just did a short on it not too long ago. And I say to my staff all the time, we always have to focus on what's in our control. Because when we start to worry about the things we can control, that's where we start to spin, ourselves just crazy for no reason. So once we just focus on what we can control, deal with those things, and that really helps us, stay grounded under pressure. But you also talked about prayer, right? And so believing in yourself and just continuing to stay focused. So again, focus on what you can control. Very, very powerful statement. Peter, what about you?
Yeah, similar to what Brandon said, I would say, in terms of staying grounded, if you're a religious person or even outside of religion, spiritual, just reminding yourself of, that higher being or that higher purpose. And also, when they have a favorite scripture, when you may find yourself, under pressure, you may quote it, or even a philosophy, a saying that, you just come to mind and you quote it, you remember it, you recite it, and you actually, believe it. So whether, scripture or that saying. And in terms of, staying focused and intentional, I would say in terms of focus, you try to prioritize, because sometimes we find ourselves doing a lot of things unnecessarily, creating unnecessary pressure. Like when you really and truly don't need to be under pressure, you're under pressure. So, you need to ask yourself, wait, is this really going to move the needle? Is what I'm doing, is it worthwhile? Am I just busy but not productive? Yeah. So, you need to start fine tuning and start, because a lot of people, even nowadays, we have this culture of busy, booked and busy, and yes, I'm working 16-hour days and doing, and then it's like, you don't need to be doing that. Why are you doing that? So actually prioritizing and making sure that what you're doing is worthwhile and you're not just doing it because, just that scripture, the saying, actually clarifying your priorities. And that's about it.
Yeah, I like that. So Brandon also talks about prayer. You talked about prayer too, Peter. You talked about prioritizing, right? That's very critical, because like right now it's a lot of pressure because it's end of the school year, it's evaluations, it's it's all of those things. So it's a lot of pressure. So I have to prioritize. But and so for me, also talking to mentors helps as well, or like my supervisors, people who have been in the field or just different, areas of the field. Helps me stay grounded, when under pressure. So thank you for sharing that. Dericka, what about you?
My first reaction to pressure is not really good. I'm like, I need to, crash out first. I'm like the feeling when you check in your pressure. I'm like a pressure machine that will squeeze tight and then just release. So like I need to crash out. I need to cry and do the most. And after I do that, especially cry, I relax myself, I step back, and I start focusing on, as Brandon said, what I can control. Right? And then I'll break down the big responsibilities into small steps. And then I'll just focus on that. And then we usually get better. Because I'm a person, I'm still trying to work on it. I'm low-key, a perfectionist. So whatever I plan in my head, like I want it to be like that. And I know, especially when working with people, it won't most likely be like that. So I'm still working on it, but first I'll have to crash out and then relax, focus on what's important, focus on breaking down the steps and completing what I need to do.
Wonderful. So breaking down the steps, right? Task analyzing it, as we would say in applied behavior analysis. Like, what are these specific steps? And again, I think it aligns with what Peter says about prioritization. So if we task analyze and we break down the steps, where do I need to start? And that obviously will help us. So how do we advocate for ourselves across different environments? Self-advocacy is so critical, right? We have to be able to speak up for ourselves. We have to be able to look up for ourselves. Because guess what? At the end of the day, I always say to people, the number one person in your life is you, right? What you're going to do for yourself, some people won't. We always have to be able to show up for ourselves first. Because if we can't show for ourselves and we're not taking care of ourselves, we can't do it for anyone else, right? Point blank, right? That's just the truth of that. So how do we advocate for ourselves? Chrystal, how do you advocate for yourself across different environments, even when it feels uncomfortable to do so?
So for me, my thing is, if I'm not going to do it, who's going to do it for me? Yeah. And if I cannot push myself and give myself the confidence, yes, it may be uncomfortable, but some of the most beautiful flowers, which is a pond lily, goes through muck without sunshine, and it's in a very challenging environment. To me, being uncomfortable is not so much a bad thing, because I know that it's to train me for something. It's to help me to become comfortable with an uncomfortable situation, so that in a sense, I'm better. So to me, again, when advocating is, I know what I want. I know what I see, where I see myself in the future. I know what things I have to do to get there. It's just the push and the drive and constant reassurance. For me, having a vision board is something that's very good to have. And again, not being afraid to ask questions. Questions aren't bad. When I'm in a seating, whether it be school, work, or any community, and there's something that I genuinely don't know, how can I help others if I don't know myself? Because I'm sure that not everybody knows what I'm even going to ask. So to me, advocating for myself is also advocating for others, because there are many young persons like myself that is in a similar situation. So that is how I see it. Pushing and thinking that it's beyond the discomfort. It's for a greater picture.
Yeah, I really love that. And especially the statement about becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's something I say all the time. We have to be able to take ourselves there. And then, then we learn from the experience and it just becomes second nature. We're able to adapt. So thank you for sharing that. Timara, what about you?
Okay, so advocating for myself across different environments, even when it feels uncomfortable, is something that I have learned how to do and I'm still learning how to do. And I think one of the main things that I focus on is respect. Is this person respecting me? Am I respecting myself by staying in this situation? Am I approaching this person with respect? So respect in multiple facets is how I know what to do, how to approach a situation, and how I should advocate for myself. So, okay, something is not going right. I approach the person with respect. Do they also treat me with respect? I should know, okay, as you said, the only person I have to live with for the rest of my life is me. So when do I remove myself from this situation? Because standing up for yourself, advocacy is also knowing when to step up and when to step back. So choosing to remain in a harmful situation is not going to give you the biggest hero award. It's not going to, get your name in the bright flashing lights. You have to know when you are abandoning yourself and say, this is not something that I have to do. By respecting myself, I choose to leave the situation. So advocating for yourself doesn't always look like pushing through until you get the situation that you want, being the boss, being in charge, or like dominating someone in an argument or something like that. It's also knowing this isn't the best situation for me. This isn't something that I have to keep myself in. It's okay to leave. It's okay to take a step back. It's okay for this to be my final stand, saying, this is not what I would like to continue doing to myself. This is not a place that deserves the energy, the output that I give them. So it's okay for me to leave. And of course, different situations, school, you can't just say, if a professor is being disrespectful, there's steps that you can take, but you can't just quit school if you know your end goal is to get a degree. So in certain situations, say, for example, doing your schoolwork versus volunteering. So if, let's say, the volunteer director is disrespectful to you, you can go somewhere else where they appreciate your efforts. But in school, it's more keeping your head down and doing it in spite of people trying to put you down or people trying to break you. So I would say that advocating for yourself in different circumstances, the groundwork for me is respecting myself, respecting others, and respecting my time and my energy. So I would say that goes a long way into determining what you should do and how you should do it.
I love that approach and that response, Timara, to advocacy, right? Because you shared even more than like speaking up for yourselves, right? We can do that silently by walking away. So especially when the situation is toxic. So I've left toxic jobs, even if it meant I was making less money. I walked away that way, right? So that's how I advocated for myself. I did what I could do internally. And if nothing was changing, bye-bye, right? I've walked away from relationships when they weren't working for me. And I think that's such an important point, particularly what we talked about in session 1 with gender-based violence. We have to be able to walk away from something when it's not working for us. But sometimes, for some people, they don't have that emotional strength to walk away, right? And so that's why that circle is important. But sometimes the advocacy, just like you said, Timara, is just walking away. It's walking away from the situation because we already know we did all the things we could do and it's not changing. So to respect ourselves, to respect whoever that is, so we don't do something with regret later, we just walk away. Thank you for sharing that perspective. Brandon, how about you?
Yes, Dr. Bubb, I agree. I agree 100%. Advocating for yourself begins with recognizing your value. There are times when I question whether my voice matters, because of my speech challenges and self-doubt. I often hesitated to speak up, especially when it comes to large crowds, school, because I don't want people to judge me. I don't want people to look down on me. But leadership has taught me that if you don't speak for yourself, people may never know what you have to offer. So whether I'm in school, leadership settings, or in communities, I try to communicate respectfully and confidently. I ask questions when I need clarity. I share ideas when I can contribute, and I stand firm on my values. I speak up. I speak. And speaking up isn't always comfortable.
Right. Yeah.
But growth really happens inside my comfort zone, and I realize that the minute I'm uncomfortable, because I say I love pressure, and pressure create diamonds, and I realize growth would not happen when I'm comfortable, too comfortable, So what I have to say is that you don't have to be the loudest voice in the room. You simply have to be willing to use your voice when it matters, and know your value, know your worth.
Yeah. Know your value, know your worth. Absolutely. So we never accept less than we're worth. We never allow anyone to devalue us. We never allow anybody to undervalue us. And to your point, speaking up, regardless of what people think, right? That's just, I've gone through so many experiences in life. Like, no matter what we do, Brandon, there's this saying, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? So people will have different perspectives. Everybody's different. People are always going to judge, but you stand confident in what it is in your voice, and you share it. And it seems like you're saying like that's what you've done, right? Not letting anybody's opinion or thought or belief in you prevent you from moving forward and experiencing and accessing any of the things that you could in life. So just being confident in that, even when it feels uncomfortable, but holding true that this is for me. This is going to take me where I need to go, or that someone hearing this message, right, might benefit from it. It might save someone's life. Who knows? Like, we never know. So just being confident in that. And again, going back to being comfortable with being uncomfortable. So just always sticking up for ourselves, always doing that regardless of what it is, and knowing when to walk away. There's this song, I forget the name, the song about know when to hold them, know when to run, know when to walk away. I'm blanking on the person who's saying it, but like that's essentially right what that song is talking about. Was Kenny Rogers? Yeah. So I think it was The Gambler or something. That was the name of the song. Anyways, right, we have to know when to take those different actions. So let's close out our conversation tonight. Timara, we'll start with you. So what's your Monday morning moment, strategy or skill you want to share with your listeners? So essentially tell us, what is one mindset or action you want listeners to take, right, that would really help them make better decisions, stay grounded, and lead with confidence?
Okay. I would say take a breath, take a pause, and go from there. Yeah. That would be
take a breath. Yeah.
Yeah. That would be my advice for short and sweet, but it really does help to take a moment. Mm-hmm. And then you can go. Nothing is running away from you. Taking a moment is not going to hurt anything.
Yeah. Take a breath, take a pause, and go from there. Yes? Okay. I love that. Thank you. Brandon, how about you?
What I would like to share is something that I learned over the past 3 years. I've been in leadership for 10 years. I've served in a leadership role, and I'm 24 years old. If I could leave one mindset with anybody, it would be adapting a growth mindset. Many people live in a fixed mindset mentality. They believe their circumstances, their struggle or limitation determines who they will be, and a growth mindset says, I may not be there yet, but I can grow. So looking at my life, I know the power that mindset can have. And I struggled with reading. And I had a speech impediment. I've experienced embarrassment. I've experienced self-doubt. I had moments where, it would be easier to hide under a bag or under the table than to come out in public. But I choose to believe that growth is possible. So every challenge comes with its lesson. Every setback have opportunity, of growth. And every mistakes become a stepping stone. So as leaders, we must never allow, where we start determines where we finish, and one leadership session that always stayed with me is true leadership reveals when you are not in the room. I think Dr. Maxwell, I think John Maxwell said that. So your influence, your values, your examples should continue speaking along, even when you're left. So my challenge is, to every young person who may listen to this, stop asking, stop asking, what am I today? But stop asking who I can become.
I love that. Stop asking what I am today and start asking who I can become. Yes, I love that. Wonderful. Peter.
So yes, I would say, in terms of better decision making, staying grounded and all of that. I would say, that saying, it will all work out in the end. And if it hasn't worked out, then it's not the end. Yes, again,
I like
probably,
that.
Probably another cliche saying, but, I think it does ring true that, whatever we may be going through, whatever trials, tribulations, whatever, even at times where, things may seem like, you're about to hit rock bottom. But then, you just remind yourself, it's supposed to work out in the end.
Yeah.
And if it hasn't worked out, that means, okay, there's still more to go. So, again, that sort of just self-belief, that unwavering self-belief, even in the face of adversity or whatnot, that in the end, some way, somehow, if you just think it, you just keep believing it, eventually it must work out.
Yeah.
So that I don't want to leave that with the listeners.
Yeah. I like that. It'll all work out in the end. If it hasn't worked out yet, it's not the end. Can I add to that being open to what that working out might look like, right? Because it might work out not the way we want it to work out, but it's still a workout. So Peter, thank you for sharing that. Dericka, how about you?
I would say you don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to know it all. I just believe you need to be prepared to take the bold step and be open to learning. I actually believe an effective leader will always be willing to learn. Because if you're not willing to learn or taking anything, you won't be effective. So that is what I have for the listeners.
Thank you. Being open to learn, being willing to learn. Thank you. And Chrystal, what are you closing us out with?
Something that my mom shared with me that she always says, this too shall pass. It doesn't matter what emotion that you're going through, whether you're happy or you're sad or you're in a difficult position, this too shall pass. So whether you're enjoying, you're happy with friends, this too shall pass. Everything has to come to an end and everything can start. So that is what, no matter if you believe that you've been stuck in a situation far too long and you're feeling drained and you're thinking about giving up, the aim is to never give up and just remember, this too shall pass.
Yes. I love that. I say it a lot. This too shall pass. It also made me think of que sera, et cetera. Whatever will be, right? The future's not ours to see. Que sera, et cetera. So it's again, hanging in there, having the belief, working towards it. This too shall pass, right? Everything that everybody said. Yes. For me, I'm going to live with you guys and the listeners, and you guys already have this, right? Or is working on improving it, but don't wait for confidence to lead. Lead and confidence will often follow. Step in there, throw yourself in the fire, put yourself out there, get the experience, learn from it. And as you're going along, your confidence will grow. So if you're waiting for it, right, you might be waiting forever, but jump in there, get in there, learn from others, put yourself out there. I can tell you a lot of the people that came on the podcast were very timid about doing it. They're like, oh my God, I don't know. I'm very, I'm very worried. I'm nervous. And then they did it. And then they were like, oh, I want to come back on. And those are the best ones I've had where, the people were like so timid. And then they're like, wow, this was actually fun. Because I always say it's really, we're just talking. The only difference is it's being recorded. So that's what I would say. Just don't wait for confidence to lead, and confidence will often follow on everything else you guys said. So again, everybody, my wonderful young leaders, thank you so much for being on again. You know, I appreciate everything that you've shared, and obviously between us now, but then once it gets published, you know, that others listening, you know, could benefit from. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening to Behaviorally Speaking Leadership for Changemakers. Timara, Brandon, Chrystal, Peter, and Dericka, thank you for sharing your experiences, insights, and leadership journeys with us today. Today's conversation reminded us that some of the most important leadership decisions happen long before anyone gives us a title. We heard that perseverance can carry us through uncertainty. We learned that informed decisions are strengthened by seeking knowledge and trusted perspectives. We were reminded that confidence is not about being the loudest voice in the room, but about believing in yourself enough to move forward despite fear. And we saw that true leadership is rooted in humility, service, responsibility, and leading by example. One message echoed throughout this discussion: the decisions we make today help shape the leaders we become tomorrow. If you have a story about leadership and behavior from your community, we'd love to hear it. If this episode resonated, share it with someone who may benefit from these lessons. And be sure to visit our companion blog, Behaviorally Speaking Insights for Changemakers, at esthercbubbabaservices.com/blog. For training, coaching, consulting, and behavior-based leadership support, visit esthercbubbabaservices.com. Until next time, here's your Monday morning move. Identify one decision you've been delaying because the outcome feels uncertain. Gather the information you need, seek wise counsel, and take one meaningful step forward this week. Remember, confidence is not waiting until fear disappears. Confidence is taking action despite it. Lead with humanity and purpose, practice with compassion and intention, and create meaningful, lasting change, because leadership is behavior, and behavior always tells a story.